Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a really remarkable source. It's the detailed healing script that's kind of embedded within this story, The Mirror Between Us.
Right.
And it's not just recounting trauma. It feels more like a blueprint for how real recovery actually happens.
Yeah, exactly. A blueprint that tracks the life of Jackie. On the surface, just a regular 40-year-old woman raising teenage twins, James and Jocelyn. But underneath, she was carrying these profound, invisible scars.
Oh.
So our mission today really is to pull out the steps she took. What made the difference between just, coping day to day and achieving that really deep internal shift?
And the root cause we're talking about here is complex PTSD, CPTSD. It stemmed from, relentless narcissistic abuse from her own mother, Jalen.
Yeah.
And the source material is quite specific about the type of abuse. It wasn't like shouting matches or physical stuff. It was described as ice.
That's a key distinction. The ice. It means the emotional damage wasn't from loud outbursts, but from this consistent paralyzing emotional withdrawal, like emotional freezing. Jalen used contempt and just being unavailable as her main tools.
Oh.
And for a child, that creates this constant state of, threat.
How does that work exactly, that emotional freezing on a kid's mind?
Well, it basically teaches the child's nervous system that expressing needs or vulnerability or even just genuine emotion, it's dangerous. It'll lead to being ignored or ridiculed or emotionally abandoned right when you need connection most.
Right.
The source gives that really chilling example, Jalen saying, "Why are you always so dramatic, Jackie? You're embarrassing me."
Ugh.
That kind of language. It drills into a child that their real self, their authentic feelings, are somehow fundamentally flawed, annoying, inconvenient. And that is the mechanism that leads to this fragmented sense of self. That's the real hallmark of CPTSD. It's different from traditional PTSD, which is often tied to a specific single event. This is developmental, relational.
And that fragmented self, it didn't just stay in her childhood, did it? It absolutely followed her into adulthood. Particularly, it seems, creating huge strain in her marriage to Marcus.
Oh, definitely. And what's really interesting is how the trauma showed up physically for Jackie. She was dealing with chronic nervous system issues, debilitating panic attacks, severe insomnia, just couldn't switch off.
Sounds exhausting.
Totally. And she actually got a formal diagnosis of PTSD during the marriage. But even that label, it didn't quite capture the full picture, the complexity of that early developmental injury. So she was sort of treating symptoms, but without knowing the real core wound underneath it all.
And because she couldn't name it, she couldn't really communicate the depth of the pain, right? Which led to that disconnect the source talks about in her marriage.
Exactly. It's such a heartbreaking example of how trauma just blocks intimacy. Marcus, he's trying to reach her, feeling shut out, and he says that thing, "You shut down every time I try to help. I don't know how to reach you anymore." And Jackie's reply. It just sums up that internal fragmentation perfectly.
Yeah.
She says, "I don't know how to reach myself." That right there, that's the feeling.
Yeah.
Complete internal disconnect.
Gosh. And that probably resonates with a lot of people listening because maybe the initial search for help often focuses on generalized anxiety or maybe PTSD before anyone recognizes the underlying relationship trauma.
Precisely. If you don't know the nature of the wound, you can't really ask for the right kind of help, the right framework for healing. The sources show Jackie was sort of lost in these general thinkings for a long time.
Yeah.
Until she had this critical discovery moment. And it didn't happen in a doctor's office.
Okay, so the big breakthrough wasn't in therapy initially. It happened kind of randomly, late one night after her divorce was final. She was just reading an article.
Yes. That moment of intellectual recognition, finding the words for the experience, it's often the first real step towards feeling empowered for survivors. She read the description of complex PTSD, and it just clicked instantly. She apparently whispered, "It's me. It's all me. Every symptom, every shadow." Just giving her experience a name, CPTSD, it validated that she wasn't fundamentally broken, she was injured. There's a huge difference.
Okay, so she has the name now, CPTSD. But why wasn't the path suddenly clear? Did the usual recovery stuff, like support groups, work for her then?
Not at all, actually.
Oh.
The sources really detail her attempts at those traditional supports, group meetings, AA meetings even, and they just didn't work for her. Her nervous system was still so wired for shutdown.
How so?
Well, the intense anxiety, that deep fear of judgment, it was so overwhelming that her voice would literally just vanish when she tried to speak. She ended up leaving early, as the source says, again and again. She couldn't do the verbal sharing thing because her body just felt profoundly unsafe in those settings.
That makes sense, and that's such a stark contrast to the first therapist she saw, isn't it? The one who gave her that classic, incredibly unhelpful advice for relational trauma. Maybe you just need to forgive and move on.
Ugh, yes. That kind of advice is just, well, it's toxic in this context. It basically asks the survivor to erase their own reality, their own pain, for the sake of smoothing things over externally. It focuses on reconciliation, not on the survivor's internal repair, which has to come first.
Right.
And Jackie, thankfully, recognized how dismissive that was and just walked out. It wasn't until she found a practitioner who was actually trauma-informed that the real shift, the possibility of genuine repair, started.
And that trauma-informed therapist gave her the one thing she desperately needed, right? Validation.
Absolutely critical. They gave her the exact affirmation required to counteract decades of that emotional freezing, that feeling of being wrong.
What did they say?
The core message, the thing that landed was, you were never too much, you were never the problem. That validation is like the antidote to the poison of narcissistic abuse, which constantly tells you your needs, your feelings, your very existence is inconvenient or wrong. It was like permission for her body to finally stop fighting itself.
And getting that permission, that validation, allowed Jackie to finally say out loud the core wound her mother had inflicted.
Yes. She could finally articulate it. My mother made me feel like I was too much. But I was just me.
I was just me. Powerful.
And by accepting that truth, that she was just me, not inherently defective, she started dismantling that foundational lie. That created the internal space she needed to actually begin rebuilding herself.
Okay, so that foundation of validation is laid. She accepts, I was just me. How did she then translate that internal truth into real, tangible change in her life? Let's get into the active stages of her healing.
Right. So the sources outline this internal work she did, and it specifically bypassed that hypervigilant, critical part of her brain, the part that always intellectualizes everything. She committed to things like journaling, painting, and listening to music, specifically music that, as the source says, mirrored her grief and her hope.
Why is bypassing the intellect so important for this kind of trauma? Why couldn't she just talk through the feelings more?
Well, because developmental trauma, CPTSD, it's stored deeper than language. You know, it's subcortical. It lives in the emotional centers of the brain, in the body, not really as a neat linear story you can just talk out.
Okay.
So when she does things like painting, these creative nonverbal activities, she's allowing the emotions to actually process without her brain needing to step in and rationalize or judge the pain. It helps release that physiological charge that gets stuck in the body. That release is often necessary before traditional talk therapy can really help integrate the experience effectively.
That makes sense. And she didn't just stay internal, right? She actively challenged the isolation that CPTSD tends to create. She found community.
Yes, that was crucial. First, she joined some online forums, which felt safer initially. But then she took the really brave step of starting her own online community.
That's a big step.
Huge. It's that shift from being a passive recipient of support to actively creating a safe space herself. And beyond the digital world, she started doing what we might call behavioral exposure and, importantly, receptivity work out in the real world.
Okay, what did that look like?
She started small, traveling a bit, attending local meetups, and she specifically challenged herself to compliment strangers, just small interactions.
Interesting. But the source highlights that allowing herself to receive a compliment was actually a bigger hurdle than giving one, like someone complimenting her earrings. Why is receiving so hard after narcissistic abuse? And the sources note the direct result of this self-worth repair work. Slowly, her anxiety loosened its grip. That reduction in physical anxiety, it signals her nervous system was finally starting to register the world as maybe not constantly threatening, as potentially safe.
Exactly. Her baseline shifted. And this internal shift, it wasn't just internal, it became so profound that the people closest to her noticed. Her own teenage twins saw the change, even without her explicitly explaining everything.
Right. James's observation, you're different, Mom, in a good way.
Yeah.
That's lovely external feedback. But Jocelyn's insight feels even deeper, reflecting the core change in CPTSD recovery.
Yes, Jocelyn said, you stop trying to fix everything, you're just here.
You're just here.
That distinction is so important. Hypervigilance, that constant need to scan, control, and fix the environment and everyone in it. That's a primary trauma response. It's exhausting. Right. When Jackie stopped fixing, she moved from being perpetually on guard to being able to be authentically present with her kids, just be with them.
And we see that shift towards self-acceptance, maybe even self-compassion in that anecdote about burning dinner.
Oh, the burnt dinner. Yes. Classic moment. She burns the meal, and for the very first time, apparently she just laughed about it. And crucially, she didn't apologize for it.
No apology.
That laughter, that lack of apology. That's the sound of self-compassion finally overriding that harsh internal perfectionist script. The script her mother wrote for her. It's accepting her own human, beautiful imperfection. It's okay to mess up. It's okay to just be human.
And then to kind of complete this healing arc, Jackie took this newfound freedom, this acceptance, and she shared it. She launched her own podcast, The Mirror Between Us, specifically for fellow survivors.
Exactly. And she dedicated it not just broadly to survivors of narcissistic abuse, but she specifically mentioned every female veteran with PTSD. Which is interesting, right? It shows she recognized the universality of complex trauma, how relational trauma and operational trauma can have really similar impacts on your sense of self, on your nervous system regulation.
That's a powerful connection. And she ends her own story, the source material does, with that final, really powerful affirmation. The ultimate goal, maybe, of this whole healing script. She's looking in the mirror.
Yeah, looking in the mirror, seeing her younger self smiling back and declaring, I was never too much. I was just enough.
I was just enough. That lands.
It really does. And if we try to boil this down, connected to the bigger picture for listeners, Jackie's journey gives this kind of three-part takeaway for recovery that you can maybe apply. First, you need the right diagnosis, or at least the right understanding. Seeing it as CPTSD frames it as relational injury, not a personal failing.
Okay. Number one, right understanding.
Second, the absolute necessity of validation, both internal, giving it to yourself, and ideally external from safe sources. That validation resets the nervous system's sense of reality, counteracting the gaslight.
Number two, validation.
Got it. And third, the commitment to action, behavioral exposure, actively challenging that isolation script that trauma writes, and practicing receptivity, learning to take in the good stuff again.
So what does all this mean for you, listening right now? The sources really emphasize that healing isn't some neat straight line, we know that. But it always begins with truth. Jackie had to accept the truth that she was just me, not defective, not too much, before she could ever reach the place of feeling just enough.
Yeah. So the provocative thought we want to leave you with today is this. What small, maybe messy, maybe inconvenient part of your authentic self, the part maybe you've been taught to apologize for or hide or try to fix, what part do you need to simply validate and accept today? Just let it be. Because true recovery, that deep healing, is often found right there in that fierce, quiet acceptance that you are right here, right now, perfectly enough.